Welcome to today's webinar, Extending Identity to the Cloud, Navigating the Future of IAM, where we will be discussing the ever-changing security environment and how organizations are scrambling a bit to implement an identity and access management solution to securely manage user access. Today's webinar is sponsored by XSpectra, a Microsoft solution. My name is Ashley Weaver, and I will be your moderator today. Throughout our presentation and demonstration, we encourage you to interact with our speakers by typing in questions and comments using the questions pane on the right-hand side of your dashboard. We'll be answering questions live both during the event and after the presentation. If we're unable to get to your question during today's session, please contact us via the information found on the final slide of today's presentation. If you'd like to join the conversation today on Twitter, please feel free to follow us at MyProfInc and use the hashtag MyProfCloud. We'd love to have you connect with us and keep the conversation going beyond today's event. Finally, attendees sometimes experience a very slight delay when we're transitioning from one slide to another, but please let us know if you're experiencing any technical issues beyond that or have any trouble hearing us. Our speakers today are Rohan Girasinghe, an XSpectra product evangelist with expertise in hybrid IAM solutions, and Garrett Bekker, a senior security analyst on 451's Research Information Security practice. With that, I'll hand it over to Garrett.
Great. Thanks, Ashley, and thanks, everyone, for joining us today. So, as Ashley mentioned, my name is Garrett Bekker, and I'm a senior security analyst at 451 Research. Today, we're going to be talking about identity as a service, or IDaaS, as it's more commonly known. Now, IDaaS is a term that's come into being in the past several years and has recently begun to get a lot of attention, both in terms of customer adoption and also as well as M&A activity and VC funding. Now, while many people may have heard of IDaaS, there's a little bit of confusion about exactly what IDaaS means. So today we'll spend some time talking about the different definitions of IDaaS, how the various players in the IDaaS landscape may differ. We'll also spend some time talking about some of the advantages of IDaaS as well as its limitations. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about what potential customers should look for in terms of an IDaaS solution. So just a little bit about 451 Group before we move on. So 451 Research is part of the 451 Group. We were founded in 1999. We're headquartered in New York with offices in Boston, London, New York, and San Francisco. Whenever I write about companies, I always like to know if there's an interesting story behind the name. So if any of you science fiction fans out there, you may have guessed that the reason we're called 451 Group is we're named after the novel Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. So in the 451 Research Division, we've got about 100 analysts. We also have the Uptime Institute, which focuses on training and education for data centers. A few years ago, we acquired the Yankee Group to beef up our strength around the mobile computing ecosystem. And we also do quantitative market sizing and end-user surveys via the InfoPro and the Market Monitor. So as I was saying, just a little bit about me. I've been following the information security industry since 1999. I spent the last few years working for a couple of security startups and was also on Wall Street, both as an equity analyst covering the security and infrastructure software space and also as an investment banker. And as you can see, 451 was nice to me. They gave me all the acronyms to cover, including IAM, Privileged Identity Management, DLP, and GRC. So real quickly about our team, we've got 4 people on our team. Our team is led by Wendy Nather, who was recently named one of the most influential women in information security. Really, this slide is to make a fairly non-controversial statement, but the basic idea is that the traditional idea of a network perimeter is officially dead. And this isn't exactly news, and we've been hearing about the notion of the perimeter vanishing for probably at least 6 or 7 years, if not longer. But I thought this was a good starting point to frame the discussion, and it also gave me a chance to put up a cool picture from Monty Python, if any of you Monty Python fans are out there. The point really essentially is that historically security was designed like a castle. and we would typically surround the organization as an impenetrable fortress and try the best we could to keep the bad guys out. Now, if we look at before the cloud and mobile came along, most companies basically had a single perimeter and would use firewalls and routers and IPS devices to keep all of our employees in and keep the bad guys out. And you could run any protocols you wanted, you had complete control, and life was generally pretty good. Now, this cozy situation started to break down with VPNs, which basically forced us to deal with remote users and partners, and also forced us to deal with and start to think about things like secure authentication, just to verify that people trying to access our resources were actually who they said they were. Now, cloud and mobile actually makes this a lot harder. First of all, in the case of SaaS apps, users can access resources that live completely outside the network boundary. Now, while many of these SaaS applications are company sanctioned, many of them are actually accessed without corporate IT's knowledge, or what we've come to know as the shadow IT problem. And this makes life even more difficult because you can't secure what you can't see. And this has actually given rise to an entirely new category of vendors we've seen in the past year, what 451 Research calls cloud application control, or CAC vendors. And the idea is basically they'll help discover all the SaaS apps in your environment and enforce policy in a granular fashion. Now, BYOD actually makes things even more difficult because employees can access resources outside your boundary and from non-corporate owned devices. So the net result is users are pretty much capable of doing all their work without ever touching the corporate network. So what this means in terms of identity management, well, identity management has traditionally been pretty difficult even without cloud and mobile. And historically, on-premises identity and access management deployments were mainly about logging internal users to internal resources, and all their identities were stored in a single on-premise directory, which was typically Active Directory or LDAP. And while this was pretty straightforward, it could often be fairly complicated, could require a lot of manual labor, and often took many years to deploy. Additionally, many legacy IAM deployments were built upon proprietary technologies that didn't necessarily play nice with each other. And for many companies, they simply didn't have the resources or the manpower to keep up. Now, when we add cloud resources into the mix, this really just adds another degree of complexity to managing your identity and access management infrastructure. For starters, as we mentioned previously, the old world, identities were generally centralized in a single corporate directory. But many SaaS applications are architected in a way that they require their own identity and repository, which lives outside the corporate boundary. So what this introduces is the need to develop connectors from your on-premise repositories out to your SaaS apps, as well as to make sure that the identity attributes that are potentially live in those SaaS apps are synchronized between your enterprise and your SaaS repositories. Now, if you only have a few SaaS applications, this may not be too much of a problem, but as the number of SaaS applications in your environment grows, your user identities become increasingly fragmented. And just as an aside, I believe there was a recent study from the Cloud Security Alliance that found that the typical large enterprise has over 600 SaaS applications touching their environment, yet most of them are only aware of approximately 10% of them. Now, the other challenge is that you may, with cloud, you may also introduce not just internal employees, but you may be forced to manage the identities of external users, such as partners, suppliers, customers, etc. And they may need to access corporate resources that either live behind the firewall, but they may also live in a private cloud, a virtual private cloud, or even in a public cloud like AWS or Azure. So this may potentially introduce not only complexity, but issues around scalability, particularly if you're looking to have customers access your environment, your number of users could easily scale into the millions. Now, for small to medium businesses, the problem is even tougher. Small to medium businesses typically have all the identity and access management challenges that larger companies do, particularly with increasing regulatory burdens. But most of them lack the full IT staff and the resources that the larger enterprises have. So for the average small to medium business, introducing cloud and mobile into the mix, it becomes a significant challenge. So just for some definitions, what exactly is IDaaS? And at a very basic level, IDaaS shares some common features with other IT solutions delivered as a service. Obviously, there's typically a cloud component to IDaaS where it's delivered either completely or partially via the cloud. Secondly, pricing is typically done by a subscription, generally on a per user per month basis, and is often paid out of the operating budget versus the capital budget. Lastly, IDaaS can be packaged and purchased in a modular fashion, so you have the ability to add new features as your needs and your business grows. Now, beyond the basic definition of IDaaS, there's really a little bit of confusion in the industry in terms of what IDaaS specifically means. And part of this is because IDaaS is still at an early stage of evolution, and some of the categories are changing as vendors add new features and services. So the term IDaaS is actually quite broad and captures a number of different categories. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time here walking through some of those categories. And the first and probably the purest form of IDaaS is what we call SaaS single sign-on. And this is a segment that gets most of the attention and also a lot of the VC funding. And most of the companies in this category started out by providing single sign-on for SaaS-based apps, generally by leveraging either SAML or APIs to help those companies extend their existing on-premises employee identities out to a variety of SaaS apps that the organization has purchased or has sanctioned. So one of the main value adds for the SaaS SSO vendors is many of them have spent years building custom connections to thousands of SaaS apps so that you don't have to spend a lot of time and resources doing it yourself. Now also, since single sign-on typically provides a single point of entry and arguably gives you the keys to the kingdom, most of the SaaS single sign-on vendors also offer some form of strong authentication, in some cases a fairly basic functionality, but also some of the vendors also integrate with vendors like RSA Vasco or Ubico to provide some other alternatives for strong authentication. Now, within this category, we can actually break this down a little bit further if we want, between pure play vendors that are focused almost exclusively on cloud applications, but also legacy vendors that pretty much started out with a focus on on-premises infrastructure and more recently have added an IDaaS component to their offerings. Now, some of these vendors have also been building out other functionality like adding user provisioning and governance and providing some hooks into on-premises infrastructure. And most of the SaaS vendors also lack app discovery features, which we talked about earlier with some of the CAC vendors are doing SaaS app discovery. And we expect the SaaS single sign-on vendors to look to add this capability over time, either organically or via partnerships. There are also a few IDaaS vendors that focus purely on governance and user provisioning, although they're not as many. But one example is a company called Identitropy, which developed a product called Squid, which was actually acquired last week by CA Technologies. And Squid had developed a multi-tenant SaaS architecture for provisioning and governance. Now, there have also been some activity recently in companies looking to do cloud-based directory services. Just this past week, we saw announcements from both Amazon Web Services and a company called Jump Cloud, which are both offering cloud-based alternatives to Active Directory that can live completely in the cloud and utilize a multi-tenant SaaS architecture. The third category is what we think of as identity and access management as a managed service, and this includes vendors that provide the on-premise identity and access management suites from legacy vendors like CA and IBM and Oracle as either a managed service, either hosted in a private or public cloud, or potentially even packaged as a SaaS offering. And the basic idea is that these companies will help companies leverage what they already have in terms of existing identity and access management infrastructure, and also help them offload some of the management complexity, deal with identity and access management upgrades, and also offer more flexible pricing. Now, one of the main benefits here is to help lower staffing and lower total cost of ownership through reduced management complexity on your end, although relative to the pure IDaaS SaaS single sign-on vendors, there may be a little bit less cost savings in terms of hardware, since you still may need to use some of your own resources. And very quickly, the last few categories, there are also a couple of vendors that are providing authentication as a service, including CA through its Archive acquisition, SafeNet, which acquired a crypto card a few years ago, and Symantec, which acquired the assets from VeriSign. And even though I don't have it on this slide, but it's probably worth mentioning some of the cloud service providers themselves are also offering some of the cloud-based identity management services. We mentioned AWS recently, but also late last year, Salesforce.com introduced their own IDaaS offering and hired some pretty smart people to run it. So it could be interesting to see what impact Salesforce has on the IDaaS market going forward. So very briefly, we touched on a little bit on some of the earlier slides, but some of the main benefits of IDaaS are, for one, they can help very much minimize the need for dedicated staff to plan or deploy or manage your in-house identity and access management infrastructure. And in the case of a pure SaaS-based IDaaS solution, it can also greatly reduce or eliminate the need to purchase your own hardware or software, so it can greatly reduce your upfront costs. Another benefit of IDaaS is, and this is one of the main benefits, is the elimination of the need to build custom connectors to a variety of SaaS applications. Another one is that system upgrades happen pretty much automatically, and since you can purchase the product in modular fashion, you can really proceed at your own pace and add new features as your company grows and as your needs change. And the last point to make here is that, as is often the case with SaaS delivery models, companies can often try out a service for a short period of time, and if they decide they don't like it, they can either move on to another service with little risk of lock-in to a proprietary architecture. That's typically the case with traditional on-premises identity and access management deployments. Now, a brief caveat there, make sure that if you have transferred or stored some of your proprietary or confidential information with the service provider, it's really important to make sure you have SLAs in place that cover the ability to migrate your data if you decide to terminate that relationship. So, some of the limitations of IDaaS, as we discussed earlier, most of them do a pretty good job of what they do, but at this stage of development, most of the IDaaS vendors don't have a full IAM stack, so customers will generally need to rely on multiple vendors to solve all of their identity and access management needs. You also may lose a little bit of ability to customize. That's pretty much standard with SaaS applications. And also some of the IDaaS vendors currently have a limited ability to work with your existing identity and access management resources. So you'll need to figure out, excuse me, if you have your own identity and access management infrastructure, how well the IDaaS vendor will integrate into your current environment. And lastly, like also many other SaaS applications, while the upfront costs may be less than a traditional on-premise deployment, over time it can actually get more expensive, so that's something else we need to look at. So in terms of where we are in the state of the industry, as I mentioned earlier, and we talked about, there's quite a lot of different flavors of IDaaS, and our view is that the market right now is currently quite fragmented, and there really aren't that many solutions out there that offer a complete package. Now this is starting to change, and we're starting to see some of the SaaS single sign-on vendors expand into provisioning and governance, cloud directories, and also provide greater capabilities to hook into your on-premises infrastructure. So over time, we expect these divisions to continue to blur as the IDaaS vendors converge and begin to mature. Now, we also have seen a fair amount of consolidation, and we expect this to continue as well. Now, so far in 2014, M&A activity for the overall security market is on pace to be a record year, and identity and access management has actually figured quite prominently in a lot of that activity. Some of the more notable transactions we've seen in the past few months, we saw Gemalto pay just under $1 billion to acquire SafeNet. We've also seen Thoma Bravo take a majority stake in SailPoint, and we've also seen some activity by IBM, EMC Simplified, and as I mentioned earlier, CA acquiring Squid. I think one of the common denominators in all these recent transactions is that they all had an identity as a service component. In the case of Simplified was one of the early IDaaS vendors doing SaaS single sign-on, but unfortunately the company lost some momentum and basically wound up selling its remaining assets to EMC. And as I mentioned previously, CA just acquired the assets of Squid, which was an IDaaS technology with a focus on governance and provisioning. So before we start to tie this all together and wrap up, as much as there's a lot of interest in cloud and IDaaS as a service, and industry analysts like me tend to follow the latest shiny new things, it's important to realize what cloud is and what it isn't. And as interesting as it is, and as interesting as IDaaS is, the reality is that most companies are moving to the cloud at their own pace. And if we look at this next slide, this is based on some recent survey data from 451's InfoPro division. And we surveyed 300 IT end users about their spending intentions with respect to cloud. And what this shows is that the blue bars represent, the light blue bars represent spending for 2014, and the dark blue represents spending intentions for 2016. And the main takeaway here is that the adoption of private cloud is a little bit higher, but if you look at this, the spending intentions for both infrastructure as a service and software as a service are expected to double in the next few years, but they're still barely in double-digit territory. So what that means is that for most firms, it's going to be a very long time before we're anywhere near 100% adoption in terms of cloud. So what that means in terms of looking at IDaaS solutions, the reality is for most of you out there and for most firms is that for the foreseeable future, you're still going to need to support your legacy on-premises infrastructure, potentially Active Directory. You may have some mainframes in your environment, and you may need to keep your internal identities and IAM infrastructure integrated and synchronized with your cloud resources. So the ability to work with your existing on-prem resources we see as a big plus going forward over the next few years. Also, you want support for as many SaaS applications as possible. And for most of the SaaS single sign-on vendors, this isn't really an issue. Most of the leading ones have now built connections to thousands of different SaaS applications. You also want to make sure that your vendors will give you a migration path. So as you look to potentially move or shift more of your on-premise identity infrastructure towards the cloud, you want to make sure you have a clear migration path how to do so. Support for mobile devices is another topic, and to date, a lot of the IDaaS vendors are fairly new in terms of their support for mobile devices and mobile identity access management. There are two last points here I wanted to mention. One is data residency. And in light of the NSC and Snowden revelations over the past year, data residency has become a very big issue for many firms, particularly countries outside the U.S. like Canada, Australia, Germany, Switzerland. So if you do have locations outside the United States, make sure you ask your vendor where your data will be stored, and if you have any control over where your identities will be located if data residency is an issue for you. And lastly, we should probably talk a little bit about vendor viability. As we discussed earlier, there's been some M&A activity around IDaaS, and we expect this to continue. So as you're looking at potentially startup vendors, there's always some risk that they'll be acquired, and you have to consider the potential risk of that happening. And Simplified is actually a pretty decent example of that. We believe EMC will support their existing customers, but certainly as you're evaluating an IDaaS solution, that's something to keep in mind. So with that, I'll turn that back over to Rohan, and we'll listen to the Mycroft point of view.
Thank you, Garrett. This is Rohan Weersinga of Mycroft, product evangelist with Mycroft, and I'm here to speak on our solution, XSpectra, along with the Mycroft solutions in the IAM space that will support much of what Garrett has mentioned today. So we'll start with just explain a little bit about Mycroft, who we are. So we do have a long track record of success with nearly 30 years of experience in the IT security space. We have a customer base that we worked with over the many years globally, everything from small, medium businesses to Fortune 500 companies. Again, around IT security with specific emphasis on identity and access management. We have a national presence with headquarters in New York City and support centers in St. Louis and Detroit. With all the years that we've been in this space, we are longtime innovation leaders in identity and access management solutions, development, deployments, and managed services. With managed services and hosting, we do have a top-tier security operations center with 24/7, 365 management as well. So going to the next slide, we can see, we'll just discuss a little bit about the evolution that Mycroft has seen in the IAM space. Over the last approximately 14 years, so we go back to 2000, and I won't cover everything on this slide, but I do want to emphasize some of the observations we've made in that space from the beginnings of IAM and around years 2000 to 2005. When IAM solutions came on, there were many challenges as far as implementing these solutions. The number of APIs were very limited. And then going towards the end of 2005, 2006, we got a little bit more solutions and provisioning access management products. They matured a bit. There was the adoption of federated single sign-on using all the open standards such as SAML. Fine-grained authentication came into the picture, being able to apply password policy complexities to identities versus across the entire global population. And more audit capabilities were also introduced. And then jumping out to 2010 to present, we had provisioning and access management products matured even more. There's a much wider adoption of federated single sign-on solutions. Intercompany exchange began as far as those types of web services, being able to communicate between systems within companies and going outside of their companies in a secure manner. And then up to today, 2014. So again, much of what Garrett had also mentioned in the way of mergers and acquisitions presented many disparate IAM systems where companies needed to be able to figure out a way to absorb new systems through acquisitions and how to manage all of that. Cloud services obviously have been more widely adopted at this time. The intertopology is definitely a requirement in regard to the idea of hybrid managing systems both on-premise and in the cloud. And IAM has become mostly driven by business and auditing perspective now, going completely changing from the beginnings where it was just merely technical. And then risk-based analytics have also shown up in the way of risk-based evaluation of different ways that end users authenticate into companies and into their systems. So that brings us to what Mycroft as a company has come up with in the way of IDaaS, or IAM as a service, and that is what we call XSpectra. And we believe that XSpectra addresses many of the areas that Garrett has mentioned, as well as what we have observed as a company over the last 14 years. So what is XSpectra? XSpectra is an on-demand identity access management service based on CA CloudMinder. And it is, of course, with that those underpinnings, we have an enterprise fully tested solution for companies to embrace. It is not something that is being tested out there and you know, being forcing customers to be guinea pigs. This is all ready to go, a very nicely vetted solution. With the broad and deep feature set that it brings together with the expertise that Mycroft brings from many years that we've been in the IAM space. For growing companies can utilize three primary service areas. So federated single sign-on, which we had mentioned that many companies are embracing. What that can bring to the table for many companies today is the ability to allow users to access web applications, whether they're hosted in the cloud or on-premise in their data centers. We, as Mycroft and the XSpectra solution, does utilize open standards such as SAML and WSFed, so that we're not introducing that lock-in for vendors to be able to provide the flexibility as companies grow and need to maybe change solutions, etc. So it is a very flexible solution in that regard. It also brings automated and self-service user management, which is extremely important in today's world for being able to not only be able to properly manage the various different types of systems that a company incorporates, but also allowing end users to have that seamless, convenient access to the many applications they may need to address. Examples in self-service management, of course, being able to allow users to be able to change their passwords at any time, alleviate load on enterprises' help desk, being able to access, or pardon me, request access to certain web applications without having to call into the help desk, etc. We also provide through the XSpectra solution multi-factor authentication. So in addition to federated single sign-on, we can provide stronger authentication in the way of two-factor authentication mechanisms. And again, these are all soft token based, so this is being utilized by many solutions and companies today, and this is all incorporated within the XSpectra solution. In the middle of the XSpectra solution, and we believe a very strong component to the solution of XSpectra, is centralized holistic provisioning and deprovisioning. So what we mean by that is full lifecycle end-to-end provisioning of end users. So the moment that they're onboarded to the moment they're terminated or offboarded, we have a fully featured identity management solution included in the XSpectra solution that can allow an organization to incorporate all types of automation in the way of provisioning end users, providing birthright access when a user is onboarded into a company to automatically allow access to certain applications, to automatically provision them into a data repository such as Active Directory or Oracle database, etc. And it provides a central portal, XSpectra, for end users to launch their various web applications, as well as a central management, identity management portal for administrators. So a very nice full-featured identity platform in that regard. And finally, risk-based policy enforcement, which is coupled with a multi-factor authentication part of the solution to provide risk-based evaluation of all types of end-user authentications. Many folks have probably seen online bank sites use a lot of risk-based policy enforcement. XSpectra provides those types of risk-based enforcement as well through many types of rules, such as geolocation, restricting certain users from logging in from a certain region, or device ID, tracking what types of devices that a user is logging in from into their systems. So again, XSpectra is full-featured, being able to address customer needs quickly with the automation that I had mentioned through different types of IAM policies. We host and manage XSpectra by our top-tier Security Operations Center, which is a high compliance security standard compliance, 24/7 support at all times. We also include, again, with the expertise that Mycroft brings to the table, and around this solution, XSpectra, is the ability to customize according to organizations' needs, specifically in the way of identity management. Endpoint connectors, while this includes 35 plus out-of-the-box connectors that are ready to go today, we can extend and be flexible to organizations who may have some disparate legacy applications out there that we can also help address and customize for those customers. And the capabilities of IAM without the need of large IT infrastructure. Garrett had also mentioned that this being an IDaaS solution, customers do not need to worry about hardware and software upgrades or establishing that footprint in their respective data centers. This is cloud-based, hosted by Mycroft, and so that headache is off the shoulders of many organizations going with a solution such as XSpectra. So in summary, again, XSpectra being hosted in the cloud, low cost with a subscription pricing model, enterprise class features and functions, hybrid solution that integrates on-premise and in cloud applications, and quick deployment. This being a multi-tenant based cloud solution, it can be deployed very quickly per tenant per organization. So we can bring this up as quickly as within a couple of days to a week, and allow organizations to begin deploying out and their respective systems. So speaking about customizations and strategies around XSpectra, we believe, again, based a lot and supporting a lot of what Garrett had spoken on, the hybrid solution, we feel that XSpectra really brings in that strong choice of a solution that can handle both on-premise and cloud management. And we believe that we're the right choice in regard to the fact that we have been focusing on this for quite some time, and is essential to the XSpectra solution. As far as customizations, again, gleaned over 30 years of experience with our solution architects and high-end engineers, IAM engineers to be exact. We can, from a consultation, a strategy management and monitoring perspective, really address the needs of many organizations in this way. We can customize, again, bringing together what exists today and is ready to be implemented with the XSpectra solution and beyond through customizations, again, bringing our expertise to the table. Business-centric, end-to-end solutions for organizations of all sizes. Again, we work with several small, medium businesses all the way up to Fortune 500 companies. So we have very wide range of experience with the different types of organizations that we work with over time. We are able to work with secure network architecture. Again, we're very familiar with the different compliance needs of organizations. We monitor solutions, our experience with dealing with organizations, dealing with their needs, user experiences are very strong, and user management processes, we're able to implement those very well. Continuing on what we provide in the way of customizations and our strategy to help organizations implement a strong IAM solution, including XSpectra, a bespoke and well-defined management plan. So this includes a well-managed teams of experts that can come in and help you. We dedicate project managers to lead those teams to be able to properly help you address and deploy these solutions in your environment. We will help drastically reduce operating costs, freeing up critical resources on your end so that you don't have to hire extra or permanent resources to manage long-term these solutions that you implement in the way of IAM. We also are experts, leading experts, and can help improve your legal and regulatory compliance. That could be everything from PCI, SOX, HIPAA, the list goes on. Enhancing your new functionality and further refining customization on IAM roadmap. So that is also an area that we can bring to the table in terms of helping organizations assess what they have today and be able to recommend roadmaps for addressing your IAM challenges going into the future. Again, we are very good at equipping all sizes of organizations to respond quickly and effectively to the latest real-world IT security threats. Again, we are and have been in the IT security space for nearly 30 years, and many of our engineers and our solution architects are ready to go and understand your challenges beforehand and are very able to address these needs. Now, stepping back a little bit from the XSpectra solution or from the IDaaS perspective, we also have a strong professional services heritage from Mycroft. Professional services are there to improve security, increase reliability, and reduce operational risks. Again, as I mentioned before, we have the expertise to come in to any organization and help assess through current state assessments and future state roadmap recommendations, and or plan and define for implementation, and or the assistance in deploying solutions in your organization. We leverage industry-leading software and deliver core managed services and a growing portfolio of IAM solutions as we continue to become stronger in the IAM space. Our reputation is very strong in IT management, especially in IAM, through many strong partnerships such as CA, for example, with our XSpectra solution. And again, we provide the highest level of customizations. Again, many years of working with different types of endpoint systems. Our engineers are quickly and are able to understand different types of legacy systems that no longer are supported in IAM. And we are able to continue to help you not only implement new solutions, such as XSpectra, but to also continue to manage and centralize legacy systems as well. So with all of that, again, with everything that Garrett had mentioned and what's going on in the industry and what Mycroft has in the way of our expertise in the IAM space, IT security space, as well as bringing to the table our solution, XSpectra, from an IDaaS perspective, how does this improve an organization's security posture? We believe, we recommend highly that organizations review their overall security plan, specifically the approach your business takes to security from planning to implementation, thinking about your technical and non-technical policies in place. For example, this interesting graphic of a person, an end user, with their password, username, password written on the palm of their hands. Those are examples of non-technical policies that organizations should obviously think about and make sure that you have the appropriate IAM systems in place to prevent these types of practices. And also protecting organizations from both internal and external threats. How can you protect your organization? For example, increasing your organization's password complexity policy that includes password strength, requiring frequent password changes, security question and answers, etc. Implement organization password best practices, as I said, not allowing passwords to be written down, coaching end users on good practices in the way of security, and allowing them to understand the importance of breaches that do occur and the high cost of that. And dedicating staff resources to more essential tasks. Again, IDaaS provides the convenience of a solution being hosted in the cloud and organizations not having to spend extra monetary resources on hiring and training staff resources to focus on managing all of that. Rather, they can focus on the task at hand and extend into your organization to the areas that they are needed. And finally, thinking about tracking user requests, access requests for greater visibility of the entire security picture. So again, with XSpectra, for example, we incorporate a strong access request policy, which allows end users to request access and have that request either be approved or rejected. And in that process, what happens is all of those activities are logged in the system. And obviously, for auditing needs, that information is essential to be able to not only understand what users are accessing, when they're accessing, why they're accessing those applications or those resources, but also to help meet your compliance needs.
Great, thank you so much, Rohan. We did receive a couple of questions, and please feel free to continue submitting questions through the dashboard and the pane on the right-hand side of your screen. I'm going to go ahead and throw a couple of these out there, and then you and Garrett can kind of field these and see who wants to answer what. The first question that came in says, what are the benefits or challenges for moving directories to the cloud?
It's a great question. So there are many challenges to moving directories to the cloud. First and foremost, compliance comes into the picture. There are organizations that cannot do so. So what they're left with is a situation where they want to centralize their management, their identity management, but have this disparate situation where they have certain directories on-premise and then they are using a solution, say an IDaaS solution in the cloud. So that's where, again, we really emphasize the need, or one way to address that is a hybrid solution, such as XSpectra, so that you can use a solution that centralizes identity management from one point and can synchronize all of the changes to identities, all the provisioning, deprovisioning, all the audit tracking, synchronize that, as well as password synchronization from the cloud to on-premise systems and vice versa.
Great, thank you so much. We received another question as well that says, this goes back to the slide that Garrett was showing of the different kind of players in different areas. And Garrett, this question says, what are the main challenges for the pure play IDaaS vendors?
Well, again, I think it goes back to what we had said before. I think the IDaaS vendors have done a great job of providing connectivity to thousands of SaaS applications, and as I mentioned earlier, that's not a trivial problem. Every SaaS application is architected differently. The quality of the APIs they expose is completely different. So to actually put in the legwork to do that is really challenging. But at the same time, there's a lot of other stuff that needs to be done out there. And again, one of our core themes is that it's great to be able to address SaaS applications, but there's a lot more out there. So I think to a large extent, you're going to see the SaaS single sign-on vendors look to extend their capabilities into on-premise resources and into other areas, but right now it's not a complete solution, and you still have to bring in other vendors from outside if you want a complete IAM solution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you so much. And then we have a question here about data residency. It says, let me see here. You mentioned data residency. How are most of the IDaaS vendors dealing with data residency?
So I can take that. So this is something at 451 we've actually been hearing and seeing quite a lot about, and as much attention as the NSA revelations and Edward Snowden have gotten in the United States, the reaction across overseas has been a lot more drastic, and we're seeing a lot of governments taking fairly drastic action, passing different laws, some of which are in process right now and not finalized. But generally, what we're seeing is not just IDaaS vendors, but also particularly with infrastructure as a service vendors and SaaS vendors, they're starting to build out data centers and locations in some of these various countries, whether it be Germany or Australia, Canada, or some of the, in Switzerland, or some of the ones that have been more aggressive in terms of data residency. In terms of the IDaaS vendors, I haven't seen a lot specifically in terms of them moving to address this directly, although one of the vendors, OneLogin, is actually building, has built or is building a European data center to help address this. The other thing to keep in mind, some of the IDaaS vendors are actually hosting their infrastructure on the infrastructure of another vendor like Amazon or Rackspace, et cetera. So there hasn't been a lot of upfront discussion about this, but I think the key message is it's important to talk to your potential IDaaS vendor and see what solutions they may have and what answers they may have to data residency if that's a concern.
Oh, that's great. That's great. We have one more question, and like I said, if you do have any other questions, please feel free to ask. But our last question that we have here says, it's a pretty specific question. Obviously, someone's struggling with remedying an issue. It says, what would you recommend as the best way to protect an organization's IAM infrastructure from the danger of an orphaned account or orphaned accounts?
Sure, I can take that question. So that's a great question. So that's definitely a challenge that many companies have, obviously, with orphaned accounts, a result of end users leaving the company and those accounts not being properly deprovisioned or offboarded, or they are offboarded but they linger in the data repositories of many organizations, creating data bloat, etc. So one way to do that, again, is the ability for the solution that an organization chooses in the way of IAM to be able to query those orphaned accounts and be able to tag them or flag them appropriately. And so, again, to plug XSpectra, that is a definitely strong identity management solution there that provides the ability for an organization to be able to search for orphaned accounts based on the state, if they're active or inactive, and flag those and have those quarantined, et cetera, appropriately.
Great, awesome. I hope that answered your question. Those are all the questions that we received. If you have any other questions, obviously our contact information is up on the screen there. I want to take a second and thank Garrett and 451 very, very much for doing this with us today. And I want to thank all of you for joining us today. You'll be receiving an email that will alert you to the on-demand recorded status of today's event so that you can review any material you missed or go over anything you'd simply like to see again. Don't hesitate to reach out to us through the contact information on your screen, like I said. And on behalf of Rohan, Garrett, 451, myself, and the entire team here at Mycroft, I'd like to thank you for joining us and taking time to view our presentation today. Thanks so much.